You're listening to This Motorcycle Life, conversations about why we ride. Episode 40, The Worst That Could Happen. I'm Bruce Philp, and thank you for listening. Well, if the worst happened, if one terrible moment on a motorcycle took away almost everything that mattered to you, would you ride again? Well, this episode's guest has stood at the very gates of that hell, and his answer might amaze you, or maybe it won't amaze you at all. Either way, it's a tragic and hopeful story, generously shared, and dramatic proof that motorcycling's hold on us really is as strong as it feels. We'll get to that in a moment, but first, let's take care of a few simpler matters. I continue to hear from listeners almost daily anymore, and I'm really grateful for that. This time around, I wanted to acknowledge one theme in particular. More and more often lately, this correspondence has also included some really good episode ideas, a couple of which I'm already working on. Special thanks for those, because they make me feel like there's a bit of a community growing around this podcast, which is really a lot more than I could have hoped for. July also brought some great reviews and 5-star ratings on iTunes, which are really helping people find these stories. So to those of you who went to that trouble, again, thank you. If you want to get even more involved, visit thismotorcyclelife.com, and there you can leave me a comment. You can help me produce this podcast by picking up some This Motorcycle Life merch. Still not used to saying that. Or, best of all, make a much-needed donation to the Movember Foundation. Okay, here we go. When I started this podcast, I was excited by the idea of looking at our sport from as many perspectives as I could. I thought that might contribute something to our sense of community, and I was genuinely curious about what makes motorcyclists so passionate. Well, This Motorcycle Life is supposed to be a love letter to motorcycling, I thought, and as with any intimate relationship, no subject should be off limits. Except maybe the subject of our own mortality, or really any of the consequences of that one terrible day that we all secretly fear, but mostly manage to avoid. In the theater world, actors superstitiously refer to Shakespeare's Macbeth as the Scottish play, because calling it by its name might awaken an ancient curse. Well, motorcyclists, it seems to me, are a bit like that when it comes to the price that any of us might be asked to pay for doing this, and to me, that was always a good reason to avoid the subject here, too. Then, in March of 2020, I got an email from a listener named Omar Petralis. He had been captivated, that's the word he used, by my conversation with Melissa Holbrook Pearson in an episode called Reborn, and he wanted to share his story so that I'd understand why. Well, I was practically in tears before the end of the first paragraph, because it was a story about a crash that took the life of his wife, nearly took his ability to walk or work again, left him in hospital for a year, and then began a years-long struggle for physical and then emotional recovery, a struggle that continues today. And here's the thing, Omar wanted to ride again. And it felt to me, at least in that moment, like maybe he needed someone to understand that. I told him at the time, if you ever want to talk about this, if you want to share what you've been through, if that would help somehow, well, I think people would listen. More than a year passed, and then this June, I got a note from Omar saying, I'm ready to talk. And that's the conversation you're about to hear. Now, a couple of notes before we listen to this. First, for reasons related to PTSD from the accident, Omar asked if we could do this interview in person, and I was glad to accommodate him. We met in my barn on a sunny day in late July. So if you hear birds in the background, or maybe not so much in the background, It's not your imagination. And finally, a warning that this interview includes some emotionally intense and graphic moments. I hope you'll trust that neither I nor my guest would have proposed telling you his story if it had no insight or hope to offer. And maybe this spoiler will help. Omar rode his bike to my place. Here's our conversation, just as it happened. Well, welcome to the farm, Omar. Thanks for being with me today. How was your ride up?
Ride up was fantastic. It was about 3.5 hours from where I was, and not sure I could have picked a better day for it. And I got to see some roads that I hadn't been on before, and that's always, as a motorcyclist, that's always nice.
Yeah, that's actually a beautiful trip, and it is a beautiful day. Talking to another rider is about the only thing that would have kept me off the bike, I have to say, in all honesty. Well, I have to tell you, there are times with this project that I get it reconfirmed that I'm an amateur, and this has been one of those times because I've strained my brain trying to figure out how to begin this conversation, in a clever way, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion, which is very unimaginative, and it might be, the most difficult part of the curve for us, but I feel like this is how we have to start. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean, I keep coming back to that terrible day on the Trans-Labrador Highway in August of 2017, and I wonder if I could ask you to start us off by telling everyone listening what happened that day.
Sure. Well, we were. The goal was for us to ride Newfoundland the hard way, and so we went up through the Trans-Labrador Highway and the Coastal Highway and took the short ferry to the northern tip of Newfoundland, and we were camping in Gros Morne for 3 days, and the place that we were at was a rustic site, and so we were, after 3 days, in desperate need of a shower.
Right.
So we had a hotel booked in Corner Brook, which was sort of the next biggest town for us, and it was an easy day. We just got up, we broke camp. It was overcast, but a clear day. We just got on the bikes, and instead of riding hard, which is what we had been doing, we were just tootling along. And the goal was just to get to Corner Brook by about 2:00 in the afternoon and get and to grab a shower. And we were on the Trans-Canada, and in a nondescript. There was nothing special about where we were. What I remember was a 2-lane highway with a speed limit of 90 kilometers an hour and a slight bend to the left as we were looking ahead. And there were 3 of us, myself, my wife Linda, and our friend Chris, riding in staggered formation as we do. And I saw a car in the distance. And again, unremarkable, right? Of course there's a car in the distance. And as he approached me, right in front of me, he turned into us at full speed. He just plowed through us like we were bowling pins. And so, from my perspective, I when it happened, I saw it happening, and my instinct was to countersteer as hard as I possibly could. And I remember swearing in my helmet, and that's all I got out. That's all the time I had. When the accident was reconstructed, based on the math and the skid marks and all that stuff, they figured I had about 1.4 seconds, and the brain needs 1.5 seconds in order to do anything productive. So the point is, we had no time. There was nothing we could do. And I remember flying through the air. I remember thinking that I was flying through the air. And I remember hitting the ground, and I remember sliding. And was in the ditch, and then the pain started. And I've been thinking about how to describe what this feels like, or what it felt like. I say feels sometimes. I get tenses. Sometimes it feels like all of this is still with me. So forgive my confusion of tenses. But what I felt, the only way that I can describe it is if you can imagine the upper part of your body caught in one set of vice grips and the lower part of your body caught in a separate set of vice grips, and you were turned 360 degrees, what that would feel like as every part of your body was put into a position it was never meant to be in. And that's what it felt like, and that's where I lay. Luckily, the cars behind us One of them had a retired nurse in it, and she came to my side immediately. And her job was just to keep my eyes open, keep me from going into shock. And she never left my side. Problem was where we were was so remote, and we were out of cell service, and we were out of radio service even. That somebody had to drive 20 minutes in order to get a radio signal. So help was going to be a long time coming. Luckily, again, coming the other direction was an ambulance returning from a call. They had no idea that we were there. They were not prepared for us.
Jeez.
But they were there to take control of the situation at the very, very least. There's a couple of other very lucky things that happened in that experience, but those two in particular, I don't know if I would have made it had those two things not happened at the scene right there. If I had closed my eyes, I'm not sure I would have reopened them. So,
well, and that was just the the beginning of the horror, right?
Yeah, because as it turned out, my wife was she didn't make it. You know, I've told this story so many times, but it's never easy, and it feels wrong to say this, but luckily, she passed away instantly. The car T-boned me, and she T-boned the car, and she didn't suffer. So now lying there in the road, I didn't know, because as we talked about pre-interview, I'm a guy who likes his control. So as I was laying there in the ditch, my friend Chris, who was riding with us, who was also hit but managed to keep his bike upright by some lucky omen. I don't know how he did that. Came over to me, and I started not shouting at him. I started telling him what to do. I started taking control of the scene. I want you to call this person. I want you to take pictures here. I want you to make sure Linda's okay. And he must have had a quick conversation with the other folks who were at the scene, and they decided not to tell me. So it wasn't until the next day, when I was conscious enough post-surgery, the first surgery, to actually hear the information, and when I was told, I promptly passed out again, I'm told. So yeah, that is a synopsis of what happened.
Right. Well, I certainly don't, we don't need to dwell in that moment, but it sort of how this all begins. I appreciate you sharing it with me, and I'm sorry it's so still so fresh and difficult, which I think it probably would be for anybody. And I'm also incredibly sorry for your loss and for everything you've been through since, which we're going to talk a lot more about. If you'll permit me an observation, I remember you writing somewhere on an internet forum that you were, grateful for your wife's determination to kind of make her own choices, and she sounds like an amazing person.
Absolutely. I mean, we started riding together at the very beginning of our relationship, and riding was always a central part. She was never content to be on the back, which I loved, and we went all over the place. We did all kinds of our vacations were motorcycle related,
Right?
And yeah, again, there's no right way to talk about any of this, right? When people say, "Well, I have no words," no, I don't have any words either. All my words are wrong. But yeah, she got shot out of a cannon. She wasn't squeezed out of a tube, if that makes sense.
Yep, it does.
So that's how she'll always be remembered. And I think if there's any value in any of what happened, then I think that's a part of it.
Yeah, which is probably in the end all we can any of us hope for. Why don't we talk a little bit about your motorcycle life before this? I'm curious to know kind of how you started, because it sounds like, again, from our conversation when you first got here, it sounds like it's been central to who you are and how you live for a very long time. And so I'd love to hear more about that when you started. And
Sure. I mean, it started relatively. I mean, the starting of it wasn't terribly interesting. I got my license when I was 18 years old. I got a motorcycle license because at the time I never thought I'd be able to afford a car.
Right.
So I started with a motorcycle license. But it really wasn't until I was 30 years old that I started really, I guess, riding. That's when I owned my first motorcycle. And it was what I call a third life crisis.
Right.
Right. Where, I was initially thinking about buying a silly car, the idea of a motorcycle was brought up. It's a lot less expensive and probably a lot more fun.
Right.
And I just latched onto it, and I never let go. I went from cruisers to ADV bikes, and I'm a tall guy. I'm 6'3" and or so ADV bikes fit me quite a bit, and they permitted me to go all over the place. So we spent a trip for us, a great annual trip used to be to go down the Tail of the Dragon, do the Blue Ridge Parkway down to Tail of the Dragon. We went to Wyoming. We've been through Colorado a couple of times. And in between all of that stuff, I was the kind of person who needed to ride compulsively all the time. So I was commuting to work. Bad days didn't matter. That's why Gore-Tex was invented. And so it was, the way I would describe it is it felt like a compulsion. Now, when I look back on it, it felt like a compulsion, but I rode everywhere all the time. And I was one of those guys.
Yeah,
right. One of those guys.
Yeah. Guys like that don't usually approve of guys like me, but as I think we'll get to, we have some common ground.
Absolutely we do.
So, I mean, in a sense, this is, this is sort of this conversation is going to kind of be about the road back, because I think that's where people will get the value from what you've been through. So why don't we talk about that a little bit? You wrote me at one point in our correspondence. So for the benefit of listeners, we actually connected more than a year ago, and we couldn't. You were interested in sharing your story, but couldn't because there was some ongoing, kind of legal issues around the event, and that's resolved now. And
yes,
that's why we're here. And you wrote me at that time. You said, I spent over a year in the hospital recovering, almost lost my left foot, and had to learn how to walk again. After a bone graft failed and became infected, I was readmitted and eventually had to learn to walk a second time, all while grieving my loss and trying to manage survivor's guilt and PTSD. So I want to unpack that a bit because, to me, you've kind of been to the hell we all, if fear's the right word. I want to get you to unpack that a bit, and I thought maybe we could start with the physical injuries.
Sure.
You don't need to go into any more detail than you feel comfortable going into, but I feel like it's necessary for us to know what the body goes through in a situation like this. And
I am comfortable talking about the physical injuries in particular. I mean, they were the easiest ones, and that's saying something. But basically, what ended up happening, again, just for context, was my left elbow was broken in 4 pieces. The entire left side of my body was crushed because that's where the impact happened. So my elbow was broken, my hip was broken, my femur was broken, both fibias, both ankles were snapped.
Wow.
But not most importantly, but the worst injury was there was about 4 centimeters of bone in my tibia, in my shin, that just got pulverized. It was just turned to dust because that was where the bumper impacted me. And so that bone was just gone. There's nothing they could do about it. Initially, what they did was they packed it with an antiseptic cement just to hold it in place while I focused on the rest of my on whatever recovery I could. But yeah, with 3 limbs down, there was really only 2 places. There was only 2 rehab places in Toronto that were actually qualified to take somebody with my injuries. So yeah, there The physical stuff was a lot, but as I said, it may be the easiest stuff to recover from because you have a team around you. You have goalposts, right? Every day is a little bit more. I did 10 steps yesterday. Today I'm going to do 12, right? Like all of that stuff is right in my wheelhouse, and gave me something great to focus on. But as I wrote in my email, there was other stuff there, survivor's guilt and PTSD, that really was sort of poking its head up. But because I was so focused on my physical recovery, all of that, and even the grieving really was going to happen later. The thing is, I just didn't know that at the time, right? I thought I was dealing with everything all at once, when really, no. It was the physical stuff first. And then as you create bandwidth for other things, then other things start filtering in and taking over. Mm-hmm. So...
Yeah, and so I found some of the discussion threads that you were involved in on GTA motorcycle, and you could see in the weeks afterwards that there was a kind of, denial's the wrong word, but you were super on task. That was the sense that I got, almost to the point where I couldn't tell if you were... trying to reassure people, or whether you just were still in, kind of a state of shock maybe or something. But what you're saying tracks with the record. If I can
absolutely. And those online forums were a great release for me. I have a lot of motorcycling friends all over the world, and we motorcyclists tend to make friends with people that we've met once or twice. And,
yes.
Right. So a certain part of me was reassuring that everybody that it was okay. I'm sure subconsciously I was reassuring myself that I was going to be okay, but I didn't know. I didn't know. I thought everything was. I thought I was dealing with everything. I thought everything was in my face, but no, there was a lineup of stuff, and the other stuff I needed to create some bandwidth before I got to that.
So again, we don't need to go any deeper into this than you want to, but it felt to me like the mental and spiritual part of the recovery was an even longer road, and maybe you're still on it. Absolutely,
I'm still on it. There's no question, and it was surprising because. Again, the physical stuff is easier once I got up and started walking and all of that good stuff. I was surprised at how much mental and emotional and psychological stuff popped out of the work. I do consider myself a very resilient person. But even with that, man, it turned into a constant set of surprises that I really didn't care for. Mm-hmm. The first time my PTSD really flared up was one of the ways that it manifests itself for me is in anger. My amygdala, which is the part of the reptilian brain that controls fight or flight, still to this day is jammed on fight. And so when I get into a conflict situation, even in an argument, like it happens around a dinner table, right? My immediate reaction is to be conflict oriented, which is not helpful. And I'm sure that's not the end of it. I'm sure once I deal with that, some other symptom is going to pop up. Yeah. I'm not sure. I hope that the PTSD is something that I can deal with and resolve and move on. But the more I experience it, the more I think it's just something you learn to manage as you move forward. And so I suppose we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine. It's funny. I was a long time ago a fan of the author John Irving, and he used to write books sometimes about people who were born with certain tendencies, and then their lives would present them with the situations that would either undo those tendencies or specifically need them. Yeah. And your story feels a little like that to me. That all the stuff that made former Omar what he became what he needed to get through this.
Yeah, and interestingly, I believe that I've really changed as a person as a result of this. So one of the ways that I look at it is all of that material was fuel that I needed to burn.
Yeah.
Right. But in burning it, I consumed a lot of it, and so I'm not the same person that I used to be. And I'm grateful for that in a lot of ways. One of the things that I picked up in rehab very, very quickly is the power of gratitude, which former Omar would have dismissed out of hand with a sneer. But I'm here to tell you that it makes all the difference, and it may be the one thing that really contributed to my recovery is actually being grateful. Not grateful for what happened, right? But being grateful for not the good that comes next, but the things that come next, right? Even acknowledging that there could be any good that comes after something like that is actually difficult to swallow.
Of course,
sometimes.
Of course.
But no, it was fuel that I consumed during my recovery process.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'll probably say this 80 times without meaning to, but I just can't imagine, and I think I'm probably not the only person who wonders if they would be equal to something like this. Do you think that if we'd asked you 5 years ago if you'd be equal to something like this, you'd have said yes?
If you had laid it out if you had laid everything out for me, very arrogant part of me would have said, yeah, I could find a way to solve all those problems. I'm not sure that I could imagine losing my wife. That's a really big one. But everything else, I probably would have. As a rider, we're aware of the dangers that exist around us. We know people that have been through accidents and that sort of thing. And for me, I spent some time thinking very morbidly about what would happen if I lost an arm, if I lost a leg. What about the left hand is for the clutch, the right hand is for the brake. What would it look like? And I would have attacked all of those as problems to solve. And I think a lot of people would do that with no context and no knowledge and no appreciation, really, no firsthand experience. That's what I'm looking for. But
but they might not be right when the time comes.
I mean, I wish that everybody had the resilience to be able to go through stuff like this. But no, I'm not sure that it's a universal trait, and I think that's really unfortunate.
Yeah. I was really interested with the way that you shared your experience with the community online. Listeners know that I have a slightly fraught relationship with internet forums because I find sometimes they're pretty hostile places. That is not what I've seen in the forums that you've been on. Interestingly enough, although it may occur, the exposure I've had seems refreshingly civil, if you like. But I'm curious about a couple of things about that. I mean, one is simply what made you turn to that community, which you did early. And you shared with them details about your surgeries and your recovery and sort of getting airlifted to Toronto or however that happened, and even some of your feelings about the emotional toll that this was taking. Very frank and open, intimate almost. And so I'm curious to know what made you turn to them. How did you know they'd be there for you?
I think the short answer is really I don't know. I'm going to try and unpack that a little bit, but I was dictating to those first couple of weeks. My hands didn't work, right? So I was dictating those posts. I wasn't even me typing them. But why do I'm a Gen Xer, and so I remember life before the internet, but I did grow up with it. But for me, it was a natural thing. I had an online presence before that, and I'm inclined to agree with you that online spaces they're not necessarily healthy in a lot of ways. Not all of them are necessarily healthy, but I have met some amazing people online. Folks who have opened up their houses to a complete stranger who just happens to be passing through. And it's those, I had posted that I was going on this trip, right? And so there was a part of me that just wanted, it was almost a part of therapy to reach out to people and to communicate with people and to let everybody know what was happening. And eventually that I was going to be okay. I think at the beginning, I haven't read those posts in quite some time. So I'm after this interview, I'm going to go back and have a look at them. I don't even know what I said. But that need, the compulsion to share. I don't know. I was halfway through teacher's college in a second career when all of this happened. And I chose teacher's college as a second career because there's always been a bit of a teacher in me. And I think, if I'm honest with myself, that may have been a part of it. Just the teacher part of me coming out and wanting to share so that other people could be aware.
Yeah. It almost felt, I'd be interested to hear what you think after you've reacquainted yourself with those conversations. It almost felt nurturing, like it was as though there was a group of people who wondered what was going on with Omar, and you were looking out for them by coming online and saying, here's where, here's the state of play. And I thought it was an interesting dynamic. It wasn't drama. You weren't seeking the kind of affirmation that people, Can you talk about how they were there for you as you recall it? So we've established that that's a community that you felt supported by and had value for you. But I'm wondering what they brought to you through this process that was valuable that you remember.
I think a part of it is it's not validation, it's not affirmation, it's community. I'm an introvert. I like to keep my helmet on. I like persons. I don't particularly like people necessarily, but it was that sense of community of folks who understood, right? I think if I go back and look at those posts, the type of people that responded are people that shared some part of my journey in some way, shape, or form, whether it's going through their own experiences or having a loved one go through something similar. There's this familiarity with trauma to a certain extent that I needed because nobody else understood. Even, the people who were right around me in my hospital room, they didn't understand. And there's a certain part of me that really wanted, I think maybe this is the validation that somehow, despite everything that happened, that it was worth it. Some part of it that other people might have made the same decision that would almost alleviate some of the guilt that I was dealing with at the time.
Right.
All of that subconsciously, I reached out. The truth is, I reached out because that was my instinctual reaction. So,
well, and it seems like it was the right one. I mean, they stayed with you. Sometimes people, I think, are repelled by damage. And that didn't seem to be the case here. So, which is really why I ask. I mean, it seems like a dumb line of inquiry, but it really was interesting to me how that worked.
Yeah, I don't think it's a dumb line of inquiry at all. And the kind of people that respond, they self-select, right? Yeah, I mean, there are those people on every forum, but they're not interested in conversations about stuff like that. So the people that respond in those particular threads, they self-select. Yeah, for the most part, I would say.
Yeah. So speaking about strangers. On the internet, there was one stranger that went by the name of Dave, that you talked about. You described to your compatriots on the forum as an example of excellent humanity. Do you want to talk about Dave?
Murph, yeah. So one of the forums there was really two main forums, ADV Rider and GTA Motorcycle. And on ADV Rider, there's a gentleman that goes by the handle of Murph, who's from Newfoundland, who he's the kind of guy that seems to expect anybody who rolls through Newfoundland to call on him because he wants to show them the real Newfoundland. He wants to get them off the highway and get them into the water. And he's just one of these people that he seems to get it. And he just wants to let you know that there's somebody there. And I will in fact, I'm leaving on 2 days to go back to Newfoundland. And Murph is one of the people that I'll be looking up. I will never forget. He came to my hospital room several times. And he just informed me, like the people online, tell Omar I'm coming. He's not an internet person, really.
Right.
So this guy just shows up in my room. And he sits down and he's in the thickest Newfoundland brogue, which I'm not even going to try and attempt. He's like, I'm here. We're just going to sit and talk. You don't want to talk. We don't have to talk. If you want to talk, we can talk. you want to eat something, I'll go get it. Like, you want a steak dinner? I'll get you a steak dinner. And he goes, this is just the way Newfoundlanders are.
Yeah.
We will open up our heart in our homes. This terrible thing happened to you, and I don't want this to be the Newfoundland that you remember. And he was very successful in that. And that, I mean, then there were other lesser versions of that happened. He wasn't the only person to sort of come out of the woodwork with that sort of hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
But a complete stranger. And again, you know, I'm an introvert. I wasn't really sure what to do with the man when he first came to my room. But he brought nothing but goodness. So I'm really looking forward to seeing him again.
And there were other Daves, I guess it sounds like.
Well, yeah, the world is full of good people.
Yeah. I hear that from long-distance riders all the time. It is perhaps the most compelling argument, you know, for adventure travel. But Newfoundland's a special place. I without intending to offend anyone else, I think they're strong candidates for best Canadians.
Well, I would not argue with that.
So the decision about whether to ride again was on your mind very soon after this, I thought, and I admired your candor about that and your self-awareness, which it has to have been a mighty struggle at that point in the process to form the thought and then to share it. Can you tell me about the struggle? How did you arrive at the moment where it was like, geez, I wonder if I should do this again?
Well, it was almost the first question that everybody would ask me, right? Just because of the guy that I used to be, and a fair question for that guy, but being flat on your back, not being able to move, having to be hoisted out of bed with a lift, gives you a lot of time to think.
Right.
Right. In fact, that's pretty much all I could do for the first couple of weeks. And so, my mind gravitated back towards riding. And I thought about it a lot, and I came to the conclusion relatively quickly that that was a decision for future Omar.
Right.
That there's I can't make that decision right now. Like, look at me, look at where I am. I've got a port in my neck where they're jamming painkillers in every 3 hours to make sure I don't lose my mind. I can't answer that question right now. When will I be able to answer it? I don't know. Maybe I should learn how to walk first.
Right.
And so I did put that off, and I got to a point after I'd been transferred to Toronto, where I realized that the person that hit us took so much away from me. I didn't want him to take this. Mm-hmm. I didn't really know why I was thinking that way, but I was not going to give him this. And so by phone, I called my BMW dealership, who knew me quite well, who were also very concerned about me. And I said, I want the same bike, like R1200 GS. I want it outfitted this way. I want it waiting for me when I'm ready. So I put the order in for the bike. And a number of months later, when I was well enough to stand, but probably not well enough to get in a car and drive to a motorcycle dealership,
Right.
I went, and with help from 3 different salespeople, I got on the bike. And I just started crying. It was just, I'm crying right now. I'm going to cry right now. It was just such an emotionally overwhelming experience that I didn't understand. Because I wasn't prepared for any feelings, really. I just figured I'd take them as they come. And I didn't know whether I was crying because I was happy or crying because I was sad. But what I knew was in that moment that I was going to take this motorcycle home later. I was good, well enough to ride, and if I was going to decide not to ride, it was going to be my decision, not his. It was going to be mine. Right. And it didn't matter if I was going to lose money on the bike. I didn't care. It was going to be my decision. I had to hang on to that. I'm not 100% sure why. I think that speaks to some part of old Omar, I guess.
Right, the control thing.
The control thing, yeah.
Yeah. It seems incredibly wise to me. If it really seems very, kind of aware somehow, and it's probably the answer to the next question I was going to ask, but I'll blunder in and maybe we'll decide that we've already covered it. And this might be the dumbest question I ask all day, but I can't think of a way to make it sound smart. And it is, why was this even in doubt? What makes motorcycling deserve to even be considered for a place in future Omar's life? I mean, to a normal person, that would seem bonkers. And I guess I should put quotation marks around normal. But I think that people who don't do this would think you were mad. And those of us who do this are kind of probably nodding, going, yeah, it makes, So how did?
Wow, that's really interesting. Actually, I don't think that's a dumb question at all. Because I'm not sure that I really thought about that before this exact moment.
Right.
Wow, how do I answer that? Part of it was honoring my late wife.
Mm-hmm.
Motorcyclists can be a morbid bunch, and between the two of us, we talked a lot about what would happen if, right? And generally, it was what would happen if this happened to Omar, because
Right.
because I was putting a lot more miles on it and all. But the point is, we had talked about it. And every time we got on the bikes, we knew, and not just in the back of our heads, because there are near misses all the time as a rider. You know this, right?
Yeah.
But part of it was honoring her. I didn't want. If I'd given up on riding, it would have been, an admission that riding was the reason that it happened. And I do not believe that riding was the reason that this happened. I do not believe that this is a motorcycle accident. And people that I talk about this with, most have a hard time understanding, but it had nothing to do with riding. It was wrong place, wrong time. And if we had been in a car, it might have been a very, very similar outcome. This guy turned into us at, full speed. When they again did the accident reconstruction, they found that his brakes hadn't gone off at the time that the airbag went off. So we had no chance. It had nothing to do with motorcycles and everything to do with the wrong place, wrong time. And getting back on the bike in a way helped me, I think, to accept that and to process survivor's guilt.
Right.
That this was not my fault. That's not a rational line of thinking.
Yeah.
Which I had struggled with for probably 3 years. That haunted me. But I think maybe that's the difference between riders and non-riders.
Yeah.
Right. That's just one of those things that's very difficult to explain to somebody who's never done it before. I if you'll forgive me the analogy, I describe riding to folks. It's like trying to imagine describing sex to somebody who's a virgin.
Right.
You can describe it, but you can't. The feeling you have to you have to be there.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with riding, right? You can describe all the technical details, but what it does to some people, what it brings out, how it enriches your life, how it colors your life in a myriad of ways is maybe indescribable to somebody who is not wired that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I have no close friends who ride, and I think they all don't know what to think, actually, and certainly would have no success processing this. And it sort of gets to something I was curious about. And again, maybe you've caught up with me. I think if a person were to try to put themselves in your shoes, they which they obviously can't. But they might imagine that they were going to be torn between the desire to ride and the need to, as you put it, honor the memory of your wife. That these would somehow be opposing forces, and that you would be impossible to reconcile them. But it feels to me like you found a way to reconcile them, and it's, at least in your life, in your relationship with your wife, that maybe there was no other way. That maybe continuing was all you could do to accomplish. Is that making sense?
It does make sense, and I'll say that it's not the same, right? Riding is not the same for me. I'm not that long distance guy really anymore. I'm not that foul weather rider anymore. I don't have an obsession with putting miles on the bike. So it has absolutely, my re-engagement with motorcycling has been a different quality than it was before. So I want to make it clear, and I didn't just, pick up my helmet and carry on. But I don't know. I think that's a hard question to answer. And here's my PTSD kicking in,
Right?
Because I don't think I've answered your question. And I've forgotten what your question was. Well, it's not because it wasn't a great question. It's just because you got me thinking in a particular direction, and I just lost it.
Yeah, no, it's probably my fault. Convoluted question, which really wasn't a question. I was kind of admiring how, in the abstract, you would think that you couldn't possibly reconcile the desire to ride with the guilt. Let's put it that way. And yet, in hindsight, it looks as though
passion isn't logical,
yes.
right? Whether it's passion for a person or passion for an activity or passion for a thing, I don't think that passion is necessarily logical. And this was a thing that was a part of the glue that was between Linda and I. Mm-hmm. And so if I imagine her sitting right here, and which is something I do quite a lot, and have a conversation with her about what would happen next, I know that she would not want me to compromise my passion in whatever way that it's changed because of guilt or because of fear, right? Or because of other people's opinions. And I will say on that note, the people around me, the people who understand me, they get it. Mm-hmm. They understand. They see the value, because riding continues to make me a better person. I stand by that. It did before, and it does now.
Yep. To me, that makes complete sense. A long time ago, I had a lesson, a lesson, maybe it was a lesson. It was an email from a listener, and he said at one point, riding is my church. And that sounds like what you're describing.
Yes. I'm not a religious person.
Yeah.
But if getting close to whatever it is that's out there, for me, the perfect vehicle is a motorcycle. It gets me there immediately, right away. And can I imagine life without it? So let's have that. Let's talk about, can I imagine a life without motorcycles? Absolutely, I can. Yes, I can. I could choose to walk away from this, and I would have some regrets, I'm sure, over time. But it no longer defines me as a person. Yeah. The challenge is, okay, then what defines me as a person? Does this crash define me as a person? And what I've really struggled with over the past couple of years is trying to come out from under the shadow of this one particular event, because I don't want it to define me. I don't want it to define the relationship that I had with my wife. Yeah.
Right. I understand. And I think I understand, your point about could I walk away tomorrow if I had to? And what kind of went through my head when you said that was how important agency is to us as riders.
Oh my goodness. That's what a wonderful way of putting it. Yes. Agency and control are definitely linked, and being able to make those choices and be responsible and accountable for those choices and enjoy the benefits of those choices. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's maybe one of the things that defines the personality of a rider. Even if you don't ride, there are people with whom we share these characteristics. Yes. Mountain climbers, right? Avid people who do extreme sports. Yeah. It's very, very similar. This agency. That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah. I have to think the decision. If I can call it that, the decision to kind of come back to this was a little bit about risk arbitrage and a little bit emotional and a little bit philosophical, and that strikes me as a hell of a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering, what helped you sort this out? Were there things that you read or people you confided in, or were there guides for you along the way?
That's another great question. my gut instinct is to say no, because I didn't know anybody and who had ever been through anything like this before. And so as supportive as people can be, the reciprocity of feelings couldn't happen because they didn't have that same context.
Right.
But as I'm thinking about it now, there must have been. And what must those have been? The people in the community were definitely a real big part of that. Maybe it was stubbornness is a real big part of it. Just not wanting to be wrong, and again, going back to the survivor's guilt, not wanting for this to be about not to define me going forward. So I'm gonna have to do something else with it, and yeah, it's a lot of work, but I had a lot of time. Right. so it's I mean, what again? Back to my point. What else am I going to do? I've got physiotherapy. I've got guests to entertain, because that's really what it was like in the hospital, making everybody else feel better. Helmet time just without the helmet.
Yep. Yeah.
So.
Yep. But it's still, I interviewed a guy. The last spring, not the spring just passed, but the one before that, a young guy who had solo around the world trip, a guy named Henry Crew. And in that episode, I think in my closing remarks, I probably, like a dork, cited Joseph Campbell and the whole hero's journey thing, and the descent into hell and the emerging out the other side. And in that paradigm, the ultimate destination is home. And I'm wondering if you feel pointed in that direction.
I don't know what home is anymore. Home is my family. I still have 2 kids. Linda was not their mother, so I still have a family, and that's a real big part of things. But part of the challenge is this feeling of being adrift. And people help with that. People can serve as anchors, guideposts along the way, pulling me towards something. What that is, I genuinely couldn't tell you right now. I'm hoping that it's something. I'm doing as much work as I can in the meantime to point myself in some direction, because I think it was Winston Churchill who said, when you're going through hell, keep going. Like, that's not where you stop. And so keeping myself going, even if I didn't know where I was pointed towards, was really helpful. I finished Teachers College last year. The next step hopefully is a PhD. For what? I don't know, but it's something, and that's good enough for me for right now.
Yep. Well, and maybe the key phrase there is for right now, because it sure seems to me like you're on a course. You just can't see over the horizon yet.
Yeah, I'm not done yet. There were some really big milestones, goalposts for me along the way. I'm going back to Newfoundland, and that's probably maybe the last milestone for this. I'm not seeking closure. There's no closure for something like this. Yeah. Great advice that a doctor gave me while I was flat on my back and couldn't argue with him. Right. But I don't know what comes next. And I think that that's okay. For me, for right now in this moment, I think that's okay, because I know I'm surrounded by good people. I know there's so much that I'm grateful, going back to gratitude, that's enough for me for right now, to know that even if I don't know where I'm going, I know that the process of getting there is the right thing to do. And to be cliche, it's not the destination. I don't think it's the journey. Right. And people start falling apart when they stop putting one foot in front of the other.
Yes. Yes. You wondered aloud, we talked about earlier, you wondered aloud fairly soon after the accident about whether you'd ride again. And you sort of made a public declaration in, I think it was January of 2018, at least online. Maybe it was before that in real life. So the span of time is August to January. I'm curious to know whether that declaration was part of the process for you. You know, sometimes when people are going to, I don't know, run a marathon or something, part of how they get it done is they tell everybody they're going to do it, so then they have to.
Yeah.
Was there any element of that there?
There may have been subconsciously. I think maybe more aptly it would be I put it out there into the universe, not to commit myself to it, but to see how the rest of the community would respond to that.
Right.
Because I had already fleshed that out with the people in front of me, my friends and family and that sort of thing. But very few of them are riders. So you put that out there to a self-selected group of supportive people in the community who have some connection to what I've been through. It's almost like I was trying to reassure them, maybe reassure myself, them by proxy,
right,
that I had a next step, that I had been thinking about it, and that I'm not just waffling on, I'm not just letting it float, that it's time to move on to the next thing, whatever that looks like. I never thought of the why. Truthfully, I never thought of the why I was reaching out to the people online, why I would make a public declaration like that. It's just that those are my people, right? And I know that they're thinking about me and worried about me, and I wanted to let them know that I was in process.
Right. That's kind of beautiful because, I mean, if you're close to somebody who's going through this, there's got to be this little selfish thought in the back of your mind that, oh my God, if this happens to me, the size of the loss is immeasurable. And for you to say, I think I might do this again, it really would be reassuring, wouldn't it? I mean,
yes, absolutely. I would think so. I'll also say that, before making that public declaration, I did have conversations with, they weren't like, what do you think? I wasn't necessarily seeking their opinion or their approval, but it was a discussion with the people around me, including my kids.
Yeah.
Like, what would it look like? How would you feel if I got back on a bike? And even my two kids, my son and my daughter, who would have been 14 and 12 at the time.
Jeez.
They're like, no, you're going to ride. We know you're going to ride.
Wow.
And so that was, again, not permissive. I wasn't asking anybody's permission, but that absolutely, something like that. So when you have the support of kids they're still grieving.
Yeah.
But they get it. I'm going to start crying again. And that feeling of being understood, like being seen.
Yeah. As
a motorcyclist, we know we're never seen when we're in traffic, when we're on the road. And sometimes when we don't have people around us who understand what it's like to ride, if we don't have riders around us, we can feel like that passion or that part of us is unseen as well. So to be seen, wow, I mean, we want to talk about things I'm grateful for.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. So we might both need Kleenexes for this one. I'm curious. I want to ask you what it was like the first time back on the road.
First time I was back on the road, I rode my motorcycle from the dealership to home. And it was about a 20-minute ride, and I could do it in my sleep with my eyes closed. It's a very familiar road. I remember I wasn't ready to be back on, like I knew I wasn't ready to be back on the bike. And I had somebody following me behind me to make sure that everything was going to be okay. But for me, it was, my feet still didn't work, and so shifting was a problem. And so I tried to minimize my shifting. And it was a physical task to be mastered, right? For me, it was rehab, right? Everything was rehab.
Sure.
And I never missed an opportunity for rehab, which is the only reason that I was able to recover to the extent that I was able to physically. But it was matter of fact, because at that point I bought the motorcycle, I was riding it home, but I think I still wasn't 100% certain that I was going to keep it.
Right.
I was just trying to get it home.
Right.
And there was nobody that was going to ride that motorcycle first before me, so I was gonna get it home, and then I was gonna deal with everything else afterwards.
Right.
So,
And so there was no when you finally went for a ride for the sake of going for a ride.
Yeah.
Was that an impactful kind of experience, or
I remember it taking me. It made me feel like I was new again.
right?
Right. I was hyper aware of everything around me, and Toronto traffic isn't exactly forgiving.
No.
But the first time I went for a pleasure ride was the first time I realized that it's not the same for me. And I can look at that and I can be upset by that, or I can be grateful for that. And whenever I have the opportunity to, I choose gratitude. And I remember thinking that it's okay that I approach this differently now. I gave myself permission to not be quite so intense and insane about the compulsion to ride. It was going to be a decision, not a compulsion. And I think in a lot of ways that's a healthy thing to come away with. But for me, it was certainly anyway. But it was, I was thinking that helmet time, right? I was thinking about Linda and, at the beginning, we did a lot of two-up riding. And if you've ever ridden with somebody two-up, you know that there's a physical intimacy that especially when it's a significant other, you're to be cliche, you're one on the bike. And I could feel her behind me. I could put my hand down and touch her leg. I'm not a religious person. I'm maybe a spiritual person. I'm not sure that I believe in ghosts, but I believe in feelings. And she it was like she was telling me that it was okay and that it was going to be okay. Now, the logical part of me dismisses all that as, hormones and neurotransmitters. But truthfully, I needed that, I think. And I needed it from her. It goes back to being seen. It's insane.
Yeah.
When you think about getting back on a motorcycle after going through what I had been through, it's crazy. But to be seen and to be understood, even by a feeling, was incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. Again, I can't imagine, but it makes sense to me. I mean, I'm like you. I'm not a religious person or a particularly spiritual person in the way that people usually use that word. But one of the things that kind of comes with age is the realization that most forms of certainty are illusions. I don't discount anything, and if there's a ghost on your motorcycle, then there's a ghost on your motorcycle, and lucky you.
Well, I'm inclined to agree with you. And for me, it was really, it didn't matter what the cause of that was, and what mattered was the way that it made me feel.
Yeah.
And it wasn't her giving me permission to do anything. It was myself giving me that permission. Right.
Yeah.
So,
when you first contacted me, I remember thinking to myself, in purely speculation, and even as we've gotten to know each other here, I think that this was probably a bad call. But I remember my initial impression being, I'm not sure this guy has forgiven himself for wanting to ride again. And that of course, this is more than a year ago. But as I say, I think I might have been projecting. And so, do you think that was true, or have you?
Wow. Maybe not entirely. Forgiveness is a funny thing that I don't have a whole lot of experience with.
Right.
The previous Omar, if we still want to talk about that, wasn't a terribly forgiving person, and I'm sure my loved ones would be inclined to agree with that. But this it comes back to survivor's guilt,
Right.
And the rational, over time, understanding and appreciating and accepting that this was wrong place, wrong time. This was not an issue of fault. It wasn't my fault that this happened to us. But yeah, I think maybe even still, that's something that I struggle with. And maybe that's one thing that I don't do a good job of processing. I haven't done a good job of processing. It gives me something to think about, so I appreciate that. Because that brings up the question, okay, well, what do I need to forgive myself for? Or what should I forgive myself for? And I don't know. I don't know.
Well, as you say, it's there's still lots of road ahead.
Yes.
How did we've never talked about this. How did your friend Chris do? Did he healed up okay? Is he writing again? How did he process all this?
Yeah, Chris's was very lucky in that, well, lucky and unlucky, right? He's lucky in that he didn't even realize that he had been hit. The only way that became apparent is when they saw the paint transfer between his panniers and the car.
Right.
So he doesn't even remember what happened.
Wow.
He just remembers that it happened. So he wasn't physically hurt, and we're grateful for that. But put yourself in his shoes for a second, right? And imagine that you're the only one who's not hurt. And so before I go any further, Chris and I don't talk about this. We are closer than brothers at this point, and we have a shared understanding, but we don't, it's not that we can't, we just don't. And I don't know why that is. But all of a sudden you're in the middle of this scene, right? Somebody's not getting back up. Somebody's screaming in the ditch. There's nobody around to help except you. And that takes a toll on a person. Mm-hmm. So he struggles a lot. He's pursuing therapy as well. He's coming with me to Newfoundland.
Oh, great.
So, it's we're going to take a victory lap. But what I will say is that this brought us closer together. This is like brothers in a foxhole.
Yeah.
Right? Your relationship is never the same afterwards, and it's difficult to explain. It's difficult to explain that out of context.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Well, I'm glad he's okay physically. I'm sorry to hear that he's carrying a load too. Hopefully, I was. I knew not to use the word closure here, and I won't again. But I hope that this trip makes sense of things in some way.
Well, it's going to be. I don't know how it's going to be good. Right, I'm not going in with any expectations except to meet the people that help me and to stand on my own 2 feet and to shake their hands while I'm upright.
Right.
Chris, in fact, is riding the same motorcycle.
Wow.
He has had the opportunity to upgrade his kind of has a lot of experience. Let's just put it that way.
Right.
But for him, it's really important for him to take that bike back to Newfoundland. I think that's part of his journey. It's not closure we're looking for. It's we're looking to finish the ride.
Yeah.
We're looking to finish the ride.
It'll be interesting to see if you still don't talk about it when you're in that context.
Well, I mean, we're going to have a lot of time together. I'm going to have to ask him why we don't talk about it. It's not like we avoid it. It's not like we're not being like manly. We don't talk about feelings. That's not how it goes either. So I'm going to have to ask him what he thinks about that.
You've mentioned a couple of times something that I was curious about that you also wrote to me. Or no, you didn't write this to me. This was actually on a forum. You said, I'm back on a bike, it's true, but I'll be honest, it's not the same, not even close. This summer was supposed to be all about figuring out my relationship with the bike, and it was complicated. End quote. I wonder if you want to talk some more about that, because it's a discomforting thing to hear, in a sense, and so I wonder if, the pessimist in me says this is this is contaminated forever by the trauma you've experienced. The optimist in me says you're on your way to reinventing this relationship.
Yeah, I would take more of the optimist point of view. I would change the word contaminated to colored.
Right.
It definitely changes things. But I'm one of those people that believe that motorcycles have souls. Like they're not just a collection of parts, right? They're not. There's you, and you have a relationship with your motorcycle. You have to. It is every nut and bolt is responsible for your life, right? And I do a lot of my own work on bikes, and so the process of getting in there and getting dirty and getting my hands on things is really important to my relationship with a bike. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, there's a big part of me that doesn't want to say this, but it's kind of like bringing a new woman into a relationship afterwards, right? Or a new person, and having them live in the shadow of what has happened, what has come before. And here's this unsuspecting motorcycle that's just plopped into the middle of this big, huge, complicated mess and is just trying to do its job. But here I am second guessing everything. Here I am, trying to process the way in which motorcycling has become different for me. All I knew was that it was different, right? And it's like having a dream where you're in your hometown, but nothing is familiar. That's what it was like. And all I knew is that it was going to take some time, and that I needed to be patient, and I needed to be grateful, and I needed to re-accept the risk that comes along with this kind of stuff. I couldn't have I can't have my head in the sand and pretend like it never happened, or pretend like it could never happen again. But that goes back, that was me processing in real time. Mm-hmm. And I think I've gotten closer on that. My relationship with riding is a lot more fair weather. It's a lot more pleasant. It's a lot less conflict oriented, if that makes sense. Right. Like it's not like get on the bike and conquer the environment. And it really is more about quality over quantity. But at first, that was a very difficult thing to accept, because as I came to the realization that things were changing in real time, change is very difficult for people, even in the best of times. And so I found that very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, two things crossed my mind listening to you talk. One is the word faith and the idea that this seems to be an act of faith, since you don't have a formal agenda for this, but you're just going to keep going down the road until the truth, kind of appears. And the other is that, I talked earlier about Joseph Campbell, which I, again, appreciate as a super dorky reference. But in this notion of life being kind of a hero's journey, where there's a point at which he literally calls it the descent into hell, and then you sort of climb up the other side, with the assistance of guides, and it's sort of it's pretty wacko, but there's such kind of permanent truth to it. Anyway, the end of that process, is not the restoration of you as a human being, but rather some older, deeper, wiser version of yourself, which sort of tracks with this idea of I'm going to ride now for the joy of it, if I can use that, if it's not too soon to use that word. Mm-hmm. That feels like a passage to me. It doesn't feel like a compromise. It feels like a passage to some higher, I don't know.
Well, let's go back to gratitude for a second, and I'm grateful for everything that has happened. That doesn't mean I'm happy about it.
Right.
That doesn't mean that I'm not torn up inside at every moment. But I'm grateful that it happened. Because what kind of a life would it be if you didn't have a descent into hell? What if it was just flat? What if it was just straight? What at the end of all of that? What do you have to show for it? I mean, I'm not wired that way, and I'm grateful I'm not wired that way, and I'm grateful that this didn't change me to that extent, right? Mm-hmm. That I can still embrace a life of ups and downs, and understanding that having been through hell, that I know what it's like on the other side, and so. I'm not saying there's nothing I can't get through. That's ridiculously arrogant, but this is useful experience that's going to serve me and, frankly, my loved ones for the rest of our lives, if we choose to look at it that way rather than And I think that's how Linda would want it. She would want to be celebrated, not mourned.
Yeah.
You know, that's just the kind of person that she was. That was one of the reasons why we were together.
Yeah. I think you probably can say, you probably can claim the ability to get through anything. It seems to me there's a lot of evidence on the table that that's a fair claim. Do you have moments of joy on the bike now?
Yes.
Yeah, oh, good.
Absolutely, I do. Yeah. Absolutely, I do. Is it all joy? No. Again, I can remember a couple of weeks ago on a solo ride in hitting some roads and just getting into a flow state, right? I remember my very first time getting back into the flow state, and it was chunky and rocky before then, but when I got to that point, it was, this is what I remember.
Right.
This is why it's worth it. And it was just a moment, but it was all I needed.
Yeah.
It was that validation. That everything was going to be okay, and that motorcycles could continue to serve a purpose in my life, a positive purpose in my life, all different than what it was before, but better.
Yeah.
For me, given everything I've been through in this particular moment,
yeah.
Better, much better.
Yeah, I think there's something special about the fact that those moments are evanescent. I can't imagine being at a point where you can just turn on and off, that flow state. I'm sure there are people who can do that. They probably race MotoGP bikes. But to me, that kind of like tantalizing, just out of reach, sometimes it makes an appearance feeling of pure bliss is the drug. And the fact that you can do that, however rarely it may seem to happen now, has got to be profoundly encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, the point was that it happened that first time, right?
Yeah.
And if it happened once, what I have learned is that it can happen again.
Yeah.
And it's not a vigorous, it's not a hunt for that feeling anymore. It's being open to it.
Yeah.
And appreciating it when it comes and doing everything I can to. It's a much more nurturing relationship rather than an aggressive sort of hunter sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny. I had a sort of a question in my mind about that. And I'm asking this not just for the obvious reason, but because of something I've sort of noticed in your writing, because we corresponded a little bit when we first made contact over a year ago and then some since. And I feel like I've got to know you a little through your online persona. And I get the sense, and you've touched on this already, but I get the sense that all of this has led to some deeper understanding of what it means to be on a bike, or at least it's promoted a kind of examination of that. You called it at one point a shared secret. In this example, you wrote at one point, "I can't wait to see the next sunrise from a saddle, even through the tears behind my visor." And so I wonder if you haven't already said all there is to say about this. Oh, see, there's the Amazon guy. I'm so mad at him. If you haven't already said everything there is to say about this, I wonder if you can tell me, is it true that you found a new, deeper place on a bike? And if so, do you feel ready to? Are there words to explain what that place is?
Yeah, I think so. And the reason I'm not, I don't know, being 100% certain about something like that feels a bit strange to me, like being definitive about it. But yeah, I think so. I don't remember writing that, and as you were reading it, I teared up again. I think I might even still be on that journey. I think maybe I'm still waiting to see. I'm still open to that sunrise. I can't wait for it. I think I'm still waiting, and I think that that's okay. My recovery back into motorcycling has not been without its challenges. Right. I mean, last year when they're like. Not pre-COVID, but when there was a break in the COVID, Chris and I actually went to Colorado. We went on a ride to Colorado, and it was an abysmal failure.
Oh, wow.
I turned around. I had to call it, and I turned around and come home. We trailered out there. We were going to ride some of the passes in Colorado, and we were there for 3 days, and I had to call it and turn around because I wasn't working. My relationship with the bike wasn't great. And my mood was such that I knew I shouldn't be on the bike.
Right.
So that was a particularly low point for me, that dealing with that failure, because that's really how I looked at it. But that, it didn't deter me from trying again. I do remember that was right around the anniversary of the accident, and that was really affecting me as well. There is happiness in the saddle, and I feel pretty confident that the joy is still coming as long as I continue to be open to it. It's not going to be like heaven's opening,
right.
like angels singing, that kind of thing, but a sense of contentment and peace. That's the peace. Riding has always given me peace. It has always settled the monsters. Describing it as church is absolutely appropriate. And my demons aren't the same as they used to be. But I still think that motorcycling is the right tool for the job for me at this time.
Right. Well, that feels like a solid answer. I mean, what you've basically said to us is, I have chosen to have this in my life. So this is you expressing your agency, and this is all happening because you want it to happen, and you're content not to know what the end game might be, because you've just decided to, commit this act of faith or something like that, which all seems pretty big for a guy who's so rational and kind of control oriented. I mean, that feels like a lot of growth to me. I'm not qualified to say that, but
I'll pass that on to my therapist. Thanks for that. Well, what's the alternative, right? I think in my mind, a lot of times that's where I go to. Okay, what's the alternative? The alternative is what does it look like if I don't do this?
Yeah.
And the answer is I have no idea. Right? I don't know what I look like without motorcycles in my life.
Yeah.
It's been far too long for me to imagine what that would be like. Would it be okay? At this point, yes, I think it would be okay if I was to make that choice, because it's not a compulsion, it's a pursuit. Yeah. I'm sorry. It's that PTSD. I drifted off again. Okay. I really apologize to the listeners there. I'm really much more together than this, but
no apology required. Are you inclined? Are you more or less inclined now to ride alone or to ride with other people? How is that aspect of riding changed for you, or has it?
I was always pretty particular about the people I ride with. I don't like group rides. I also ride a lot by myself, but I prefer riding with small groups of people that I really know, that I really trust.
Yeah.
I'm still open. I'm still open to that. I mean, Chris and I are going to Newfoundland, and we're bringing another friend with us who's never been out that way. He's got nothing to do with any of all of this.
Wow.
But I'm looking forward to seeing the world through his eyes, right? It's going to add that extra layer of joy because he's not involved in anything that happened. And so he's fresh to all this, right? And that's one of the things I like about riding with other people, is experiencing the ride through their eyes when we stop and chat for coffee or catch up at the end of a day at camp or that. And I'm not prepared to give that up.
Yeah.
That being said, the number of people that I really am comfortable with riding in that like that is really small,
right?
Really small,
right? It's interesting that you're bringing somebody along and that they're relatively green. I think that might be a brilliant move.
Wasn't intentional. I'll say it wasn't intentional. He's a very experienced long distance rider, but he's got this is his first time in Newfoundland,
right?
And it wasn't intentional. I just thought he would be a great person to ride with. I've ridden with him before, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that, this is going to be really helpful for me. And I don't even know that he knows that I'm thinking this way.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Kelly, if you don't mean for you to find out this way that I'm using you.
Well, that's all right. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this, I think we actually touched on this earlier, but I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this are pretty sure they know how they would answer the question of whether they'd ride again if they'd been through what you have. And I think we talked about that explicitly. Mm-hmm. And I guess the question that's still in, maybe I just want to ask it again for selfish reasons, but do you think they're right? Do you think they know? Do you think you can know until you're faced with that descent into hell?
I think you can think right? You can imagine, you can empathize, but no. I really do not believe that any of us know exactly how we're going to react when we're faced with fire like this.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a measure of self-protection. And I also think that we, the people, as a general rule, are much more resilient than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah.
So for the folks who may be thinking, I could never do something like this, well, I'm not sure that I would agree with you. I think that when all choice is removed, as it was with me, all my choices were removed. You have no choice anymore, and so your choice is either it's binary, either you give up and at least a part of you dies, or you carry on. And I had that feeling a number of times, lying on the side of the road. Was an opportunity for me to die. I could have closed my eyes and just drifted, and it would have taken them too long to get medical attention to me. And then again, in rehab, right, when I can choose to bail on my physio today, but and there's some patients that did that. They didn't take it seriously, and so their recovery wasn't fantastic. But I had a reason to get better. I had a reason to live. And I think when we're faced with whatever the hell it is that we are going through, there's a part of us that's awakened maybe for the first time. And we very quickly take stock of the reasons we have to carry on. And they very often have little to do with ourselves. For me, anyway, that was my experience. If I can go back to your question about why did I reach out online, I think that was a part of it. It wasn't. I was putting other people first. And in a very interesting book that I'm reading called Surviving Survival, this is a real big theme of this book that a very healthy part of recovery after you've recovered, when you're recovering from the recovery. Putting other people, finding a reason to put other people first, because it almost gives you a task, gives you something to do, it gives you a sense of responsibility. It starts ameliorating all of these higher level emotions that your body stuffs away,
right?
Because you can't feed yourself. And I found that very helpful, even if it was subconscious. And I think, as I said before, I'm not really sure why I reached out online, why it was I chose that vehicle. But I'm sure now that we're talking about it, that was a part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my sense for sure. And even when you reached out to me the first time, I had that sense too. And I think you're probably right that we're stronger than we know. But I think one of the services we're going to do by sharing your story with people listening to this is reassure them that is in fact true. It's not just an internet meme that was put up there by some life coach. It's actually the truth.
I mean, we're built for survival. That is our biological imperative.
Yeah.
And society has permitted us a great amount of luxury, but at the core of it, we are still beings that scrabble and scratch to survive. Yeah. And I saw it over and over again in rehab with other people. Watching their journeys. It was example after example after example of people who, in my opinion, had it worse than me. Who were still managing to get up and go to rehab. And God damn it, if they can do it, like, I'm going to do it. If they can do it, I can do it. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to, we'll wind our way towards a conclusion here. And I'm going to ask you about what you think people might want to take away from what you've been through, and maybe what you just said is the answer to that. But I want to, before we get to that, generally ask you about one specific thing. A bunch of episodes ago, I remember saying something to the effect, after interviewing someone that motorcyclists should make a point of letting the people that they care about know how much riding means to them, partly out of gratitude, because they make it possible. Mm-hmm. I think this was in the episode with Jay Segura, the former Marine that was a paraplegic rider, if you recall that one. So partly out of gratitude, but also as a kind of insurance. And this is how, this is sort of how I look at it. If I screw up someday, or if I have that completely out of my control bad day, mm-hmm. And I leave people wondering, it feels to me like it would help them to know that I was doing something that was existentially important to me. Do you think that's true?
I do. In fact, I can't imagine not having that conversation with the people around me. So if that's a takeaway for folks who've not made that explicit to their loved ones, then yes, rush out and do it immediately, because they deserve to know that you've thought about this. They deserve to know that this is not, you're not just, it's not just a vehicle, right? You're not just getting from point A to point B. It's more than that. Mm-hmm. And the key is that that whatever your algebra is, right, whatever your equations are for yourself, and everybody's is different, that it works out that whatever it is you're doing is worth the risk that has been appreciated out loud, and that it makes you a better person somehow. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Again, that's a great question. I've never really thought about that before, because to me it was always second nature to make it explicit, because I was always a cranky SOB until I got a ride in. I was always a better everything when I got a ride in.
Right.
So that was, maybe apparent to the folks around me, but yeah, I always took it as second nature. So I would absolutely say to folks out there, if you feel this, there's this pull inside you that you can't really understand, you need to talk about it. Because I don't like talking but if something were to happen, as it did to me, that I know how important riding was to Linda. I know that she would not have had regrets. It doesn't mean that anybody wanted this to happen. Like that's the way I'm going to go. That's nonsense, I think. But knowing what it meant to her, going back and looking over all the pictures that we took on all our vacations, and even going back and looking at those last two pictures that I took of her before it happened. I can't imagine my recovery process without something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my sense. And you certainly somehow managed to do that job with your kids. That's clear, given what you said about the support that they showed.
I mean, they get it. They understand. Not motorcycling necessarily, but the function of a passion in a person's life. My son is, he's a musician. And for him, music is the same way. Music makes him better. My daughter's an artist, and she can't imagine a world in which she can't draw or paint. I'm lucky that my kids have something like that to gravitate to, but I think everybody does. If you really peel back enough layers, there's something there. Everybody's got something. Yeah. And appreciating that and empathizing and extending it to other people, even when you don't understand their particular thing, it really helps. I don't know, it's corny, but it helps to bring people together, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I was, as you were talking, I was thinking about my brother-in-law passed away a few years ago, and he was a musician also, and he was laid to rest by his band.
Right? Which I imagine is exactly how he would have wanted it to be.
And I can assure you that it was a great comfort to the people he left behind, there's no doubt. Morbid a thought as that may be. And more generally, is there anything else you want to add? You've got people are, I'm sure, completely sitting beside you, hugging you right now in their minds. What else do we need to remember from this conversation?
It's funny. I didn't really approach this conversation thinking that there would be a lesson that I would impart. I don't know that. I don't know what that might be necessarily. Just that whatever that thing is that's inside you, it's worth it.
Yeah.
Even if it's an unacknowledged thing, even if it has nothing to do with the thing that you do, even if it's a part of your person that's inside you that needs to get out, let it out. It's worth it. It's not all going to be great. Some of it is going to be horrible, as it was for me. But it's worth it.
Yeah.
I think that might be it.
I think that's plenty. Now you have to tell me. You have to tell me about this Nikon you that you rolled up on. So I have said as a joke, I've said to the world, it's the only motorcycle in the world I don't like. It's not actually true. But I recall reading online that you describe it as a misfit bike for a misfit guy.
Yeah, it's sort of the truth of the matter is, and so here's my confession: I own two of them.
Oh wow.
During COVID, my winter project was to put a turbocharger on one of the Nikons and run it at the track. And so I have, 170 horsepower Nikon that's with a turbocharger that's on its second engine. And it is absolutely, when you think about, let's not have a conversation about why there's a second engine. But yeah. And so that's for me, I've always thought of myself as a member of the island of misfit toys.
Right.
Maybe I'm dating myself with that reference, but I'm comfortable with that
too.
too.
I'm with you.
but it's a weird bike that attracts way too much attention for an introvert. I feel like I'm having the same conversation 1,000 different times a day.
Right.
Some poor guy at the gas station today really wanted to talk to me, but I didn't even take my I just left him, poor guy. But yeah, it's an answer to a question nobody ever asked is the best way of putting it. And I kind of love it for that reason. Yeah. I feel very much like a misfit toy sometimes, especially with all the processing that I have to do, right? Mm-hmm. All of this weight that I'm carrying, and the fact that I don't necessarily know what the end state is. I'm just putting one foot in front of the other for now. Yeah. And the Nikon is a weird sense of comfort to me that a thing that odd and I don't know, the thing that odd could exist and could be joyful, and it is a joyful motorcycle.
Yeah, is that so?
And it's a motorcycle. Like, don't get me started. It is a motorcycle. That brings tremendous comfort to me. I look at it and I smile. If it were to never run again, and I would park it in my living room and I would stare at it every day because I appreciate it that much. Is it weird? Yeah. Is it, the answer to a question nobody asked? Yeah, it is, absolutely. Why did Yamaha do it? I have no idea. But I'm grateful that they did. I'm grateful that we live in a world that something like this could exist in.
I could not agree more wholeheartedly. And I bet it is. I bet it does have that personality. People were so distracted by the design of that bike that they forgot that cross-plane engine is so... sounds so beautiful, and it just is so beautiful. And yeah,
it is a work of engineering art that I appreciate, and it would be nice if more people did. But I understand why they don't. I get it. I get it.
That's awesome. Well, look, Omar, I'm so grateful you wanted to talk about this with me. I have a soft spot for stories about people who struggled to ride because it reminds me to be grateful. And this takes that to like another level. It probably goes without saying. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate the courage it took. I wish you peace, and I wish you many miles of whatever happiness looks like on a bike for you. I hope we'll stay in touch, and thank you.
Well, I expect that we will stay in touch. I still have a ride report to write based on this Newfoundland thing that's going to happen next week. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity and the platform to share a little bit of a very difficult journey.
That's my pleasure. Have a safe ride home.
Thank you very much.
As I'm recording this, Omar is still out there somewhere, finishing that ride. And I'm staring at a blank screen and thinking about agency. If there really was one single answer to the question posed by this podcast series, the question of why we ride, well, this is surely that answer. Well, you probably know this already, and I guess so did I. But faced with something that seems almost unbearable, you get to see what makes a person tick, what holds them together and keeps their atoms from exploding into space, as the Steppenwolf lyric puts it. For Omar, that force was the sacred imperative of making his own choices, no matter what. Well, there's not much I can say to make sense of what happened that day on the Translab and in the years since, and it's not for me to try. But I wanted to point to that, to agency, to the sacred imperative of making our own choices, to see if it hit you the way it hit me, as the answer to why we all do this, and to why, even faced with what we've always known could happen, we persist. Well, thanks for listening. You'll find show notes for this episode at thismotorcyclelife.com. And that's also how you can reach me if you have questions, comments, or suggestions about the show. Emailing me at thismotorcyclelife@gmail.com works too, and I really do love hearing from you. You can also find me on Instagram, where I'm at thismotolife, and that's also where you can connect with many of the people I've interviewed for this podcast, including Omar Petralis. For this episode's playlist recommendation, we're going to go to Newfoundland too. As I was preparing to put this together, a thread popped up on ADV Writer started by Omar. Well, he'd got to Newfoundland okay, but before he was able to reach the crash site to pay his respects on that sad anniversary, his BMW broke down. And there was Murph, that stranger you'll recall from our conversation, offering Omar his bike. So this is for the good people everywhere, but especially the ones on that island who helped a bereft traveler find his way home. The song is by an indie folk duo from St. John's called Fortunate Ones. The track is called The Bliss, and it's actually about finding peace on the road. Discovering this track was like kismet to me. Its mix of melancholy and hope pretty perfectly describes how I felt as I watched Omar ride away after our conversation, and maybe how you're feeling right now too. Buy it or stream it wherever you like to get your music. And in the meantime, keep staying alive out there.
Can't find a foe or friend to do this darkness in. Shadows creep and bend. I cannot pretend that I don't miss my home, or that I'm not alone. Now I must atone for all the time I've wasted. But this is what I chose. Long nights and endless road. All this letting go. Who was I to know? I miss my family. If they could only see all that I've become, alone and on the run. If this is all there is, maybe that's okay. Believing in the bliss, wishing my time away. A tender-hearted sadness pulls me through the day. But that's alright, my heart is okay.